So let me try to database UML.
Thank you.
Okay, so what screen what screen do you see? Is it the Visio screen? Are you seeing the Visio screen?
White screen.
Okay. Let me do it again. Are you seeing the Visio screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay. All right. Sorry. So let's assume that you have a table called student. Okay. The student has student has name. The student has last name. Actually, one thing that you need to know that usually when I have sent the videos, I asked these Zoom meetings are supposed to be Q&As, you know, because everything that I have discussed in the video, I assume that you have done what? You have actually watched the video, and now all you have to do is to ask me questions. So it's supposed to be more like a Q&A session. So we have that, and then let me first put a table. I wish I could get a table. Which table? I need a table. Okay. So that's sorry, I was trying to remove someone from the meeting whose radio was playing. So I want to insert a table. That's what let me see if this can work. And then it's going to take quite some time. So this is registration number. Interesting. Name. And then 1, 2, 3. So we have a student whose registration number is stroke 76. Their first name is Eric. Their last name is, let's say, right. So we have a second student whose registration number is 3. Yeah. T. It's called no, let it be a girl, Marion. Okay, so this now this here, I'm trying to differentiate. I'm looking at DDL and DML and the confusion that students usually have. And I want us to be very clear from the onset such that we don't get confused. Now, this is the structure of the database. Student, the structure itself now is, excuse me, it's the table called student. So the structure in this case is the table. And in that case, the table is called student. Okay. And part of the structure also is the attributes. So the attributes also, excuse me, let me take this call, it's urgent. Okay, so the other part of the structure are the attributes. In this case, the attributes, we have reg number, we have first name, and then also we have the last name. Now, these ones are part of the structure of the database. So I was saying that for this, if you want to create if you want to create sorry, this is supposed to be. So if you want to create the table, if you want to create the attributes, these fall in what we refer to as the data definition language. So what do you do in the data definition language? You can create, you can alter, you can drop a statement, but there are also other statements that can be used in the DDL. But of course, we are not going to look at them. Some of those things, after introducing these things, we shall employ you to go and look out for other things that you can use in the data definition language. So when you are in the data definition, you can create a table, you can create an attribute, you can create an index, you can create a view, you can create a stored procedure. Those are part of the structures of the database. You can create a domain, you can create a constraint like a primary key, a foreign key. All those are structures of the database. You can create them. You can also alter them. Altering is when you change. For example, you might want to change this table and you remembered, okay, it was supposed to be students, but in this case, you just wrote student. If you want to change this structure, you alter. You alter the table, then you put what you want to change to. If you want to remove the table student from your database completely, removing it, you use a drop statement, not delete. Because delete is for data. If you want, if you want to rename, okay, complete renaming from, let's say you want to rename registration number to, let's say student number, use a rename statement. So these ones, please note, they apply only to the structure of the database. Now, the data inside the database, in this case, we are looking at the data inside this table called student. This is the data. If you want to manipulate your data in the database, then you use the what? You use this DML. Oh, sorry. You use DML. And in this case, the DML statements that you are going to use, you're going to insert, okay? You're going to delete, okay? and you're going to update. You're going to update. So in this case, if you want to insert data, okay, if you want to insert data in the database, in this particular table, you're going to add data, okay, let's say adding data in the table, you're going to use the insert statement. If you want to delete Eric from this particular table, you're going to delete Eric. Most students, this is where they confuse. Instead of deleting, because they can't differentiate, they use a drop statement. You tell the student, please delete the record 02/U078 and 786, and then they use a drop statement. Or you tell them delete the attribute first name, and then they use the delete. The delete syntax. These ones apply on the data, in this case, these two records, and these ones apply on the structure of the database. So I believe that at this particular moment, no one is going to be confused about that. So we can proceed. Okay. That's what I wanted to throw light on. Okay. So also when you're creating the data types, they are part of the structure of the database. So we have different types of data types. Kindly, these are just that's just a small example of the data types. There are very many data types. So I want you to go look out for the data types. What is an int? What is a char? What is a varchar? What is, when I want to use date, what particular data type do I use? If I want to use, so I want you please to go and do some search on the data types, but there are quite many. So DDL with tables, you're creating, modifying, and deleting. So the general what you need to know about creating the create statement, there are some particular within the create statement, there are some particular like I could call them lines that are compulsory, that are supposed to be part of your they're supposed to be part of the syntax. So if you want to create a table, that means specifying the table name is mandatory. For example, when you say create table student, now the table name in this case, you're telling the syntax, you're telling the DBMS that create the table, but you have to specify what do you want the table name to be, and you say create table student. So that is mandatory. Also defining the columns or the attributes that you want to be in that table. Like the other table we have, the table that I have just shown you a few minutes earlier, it has registration number, first name, last name. So a table cannot be, remember we said a table is a stream of rows and columns. So you cannot have a table that does not have columns. So you need to specify the columns. It is mandatory in SQL. Also, it is mandatory to specify the data type. That is the format with the format within which you want the data to be stored. Do you want the table, for example, registration number? It is you to decide. Do you want it to be number? So you need to look at the structure of the registration number. Is it a number? Is it a varchar? Is it a char? Is it an integer? Sorry, is it an integer? So you have to look at the structure of your data, and then you specify the data type. The column constraints are optional. For example, an example of a column constraint can be, it can be like the domain, for example, specifying that you want that particular attribute to be 15 characters, 20 characters, that can be an option. Also specifying that this particular attribute is either a unique attribute, or if you want it to be null or not null. Those are examples of the constraints. Those are optional. Providing a default value. For example, you can say the registration number is going to be default. That is also optional. Also specifying the table constraints. It is also optional. So the one thing that you need to know is you need to know what is mandatory and what is not mandatory. What is mandatory is for you to provide a table name, and also providing the column name and providing the data type. That is why you see here column name, data type. These ones are column constraints. Those are supposed to be mandatory. So this is creating a table called employee with an employee ID, that is the name of the column, and then the integer is the data type. Then it has the employee name, that is name, and then which is a varchar, and the domain is 30 characters. This is a table that has a default value. So when they say default M, I don't know whether you have, sometimes when you're filling in some forms, you'll find a form that, for example, already in the either it's a drop down, they have already put a default figure. A default figure can be in form of ID number where you have, like, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then they say default. The ID is default, implying that from 1, it will go to 2, it will go to 3, and so on and so forth. So sometimes you can set your attribute to have a default figure, but default is also an optional constraint. You can set it, you can decide not to set it. So these are some of the constraints, okay? Constraints, they help us in enforcing of certain rules in our rows in a given table. So they just help us to enforce some rules, because sometimes you want some, if you, for example, at the time, if you want to capture someone's gender as just one character, okay? So that means you either want someone to put F or M. So you have to enforce it at the time of creating your database such that it is either F or M. So those are some of the things that you want to do just to enforce a little bit of rules. Also, if you do not want your data to be duplicated, okay? For example, you don't want your registration number to be duplicated. That means you have to put that particular attribute to be a unique value. Unique means that that particular value it can't have duplicates. So those are some of the things. Or not null. If you enforce a not null constraint, it means that that particular value cannot be left as a null value. A figure has to be put there. And remember, we said that with the entity integrity rule, primary key attributes cannot be null values. So you have to enforce that constraint, not null. Even at the time of, all these things are done when you are creating the structure of the database. You enforce those constraints there. So this is an example. If you look here, you say create table student, ID is an int, and we are saying not null. What does that mean? It means that the ID of the student cannot be left as a null value, like there is nothing in that particular field. You cannot leave it as a null value. The same with the last name. But if you look at first name, it does not have not null, implying that first name can be left as a null value. That is what it means. So the same thing. So unique means when they say unique ID, this is the ID here. They are saying that ID can be, you can have the ID to be unique, implying that it cannot be duplicated. It can only be, for example, ID, if the ID is 102, like employees in a given organization, they have their IDs, and those particular IDs you cannot have a same ID number as the employee, provided you are working in the same organization. So you can set ID to be unique. Okay, so this is also a constraint, but we are saying that unique can be put on multiple columns. You can say unique ID last name, unique ID age, if it makes sense to you. Okay, you can set unique to be on multiple columns. Creating the table using table and column constraints. So there is also a check. This one, it tries to specify and check whether a particular condition is true. Okay, so you can, these are also different kinds of constraints, but I said also the check constraint, that one is what? It's an optional, it is an optional constraint, but it's like a validation constraint or a validation rule or condition that just tries to check whether the data whether the structure that you have created does meet a particular condition. Is it true or not true? The primary key we know, the foreign key we know. I am not going to explain that. So constraints can be divided at one of the two levels. You can have a constraint at the column level, like Do I have an example this side? Yeah, okay, I'll show you the example this side. So you can have a constraint at the column level. If we go back here, this constraint here, ID int not null. This is a constraint at a column level. Okay, because you're putting this constraint not null for a particular column, but then you can have a constraint at the table level where you have finished creating the entire table, and then at the end you specify the constraint. Those are what those two statements mean. So let me first shift this up. So they are saying that references a single column and is defined within a column definition. It can define any type of identity constraint, that is at the constraint level. And then at the table level, okay, it references one or more columns and is defined after the column list. In other words, when they say column list, when you have all the columns that have been specified, like here, if you go to this, when you have finished specifying all your columns, then here they say unique ID. Unique ID, now this is a constraint that has been enforced at the table level. After listing all the attributes with your given table, at the end of the attributes, then you put another constraint. You can say unique ID or unique class name. So that is the constraint at the table level. So what you need to be very keen about is this can be at table level, you can define any constraint. What you cannot define is the not null. So in other words, you can at the table level, you can put all the constraints, either unique, either default, primary key, foreign key, etc. You can. The only one that you cannot is at the not null. That one you can only specify it. It's very strict on a particular column. So you have got to do it at the column level. I hope that is understandable. So creating the table using the table and the column constraint. So these are just examples, okay? Using the column constraint, for example, I'm going to ask someone. Let me ask someone here. Edith. Edith, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so Edith, if you look at this example here, the first, oh, sorry, what have I done? Okay. If you look at this example using a column constraint, okay?
Yes.
Can you kindly show me what constraints have you seen in that table?
Could you please repeat
This first example where we've said using column constraints, you see this first, the bullet?
Yes.
You see where there's create table students?
Yes.
What constraints can you identify in the entire syntax?
You see a primary key.
Mm-hmm.
So that defines that all values must be unique.
Mm-hmm.
And also on the gender,
mm-hmm.
it shows not null. So that means you can't leave that to blank.
Thank you very much. So if you look at those this syntax has two constraints, the primary key constraint and the not null constraint. Now this is at the column level. Then at the table level, it is done at the extreme. Now at the extreme, you say when you have listed all your columns, then you specify constraints. Now you want to create, the registration number of this table to be a primary key. So this is how you would specify at the table level. If you want the student number to be, if you want the reg number to be the primary key, this is how you would do it at the table level. You specify, you put the word constraint, and then you put the constraint, the entire constraint. I believe that you were able to, I don't know whether I specified, I did that in the other video or the videos that I am yet to upload, but at least I think it does make sense to some of us. Then, yes, Christian, you have your hand raised.
Good morning, madam. I'm having a question.
Please.
my question is like, what difference is there if we add a constraint on the table level and the column level? What difference does it make?
Now, the difference is not there. The difference might be only, like, for example, look at this first one. The difference is the same, okay? It depends on one. If you look at, let's assume that registration number, you want to create a unique value for registration number, for name, for voucher. You can say, okay, now for each and every particular, you put unique, name unique, voucher unique, registration number unique. You can decide and say, I'll do that at the end of the table. So instead of having to do it for each column, you just come here, you write constraint, and then you identify those attributes that you write constraint, and then you say unique, and then just list those attributes that you want to be unique. But in terms of enforcement, it is the same. Christian, have I answered you?
Yes, it's okay.
Right. So modifying a table, okay? So modifying a table involves using the alter table statement, okay? And this alter table can come in 3 categories, okay? You can modify a column, okay? And in modifying the column, there is the data type. You can modify the data type. You can modify the size, okay? The size now is the domain, either 20 characters, and you modify them to 30 characters or 50 characters, okay? So you can modify, for example, the data type, and also you can modify the constraint from a not null, for example, to, let's say, a unique, or from a not null to, let's say, a default. So you can modify a column with those different types. You can add a column or columns, or you can add a constraint. For example, modify will only apply if you have already created the table. So if you have already created the table, and then you realize, oh, this table has only 3 columns, but I wanted 4 columns. You can modify the table by adding a column or the different columns. So you can add, for example, the column registration number. You can add a column called, let's say, first name or last name. But that is if you have already created the table. Then you can also add a constraint. If originally you had registration number and maybe you had it as a primary key, but then you realize that also I want that registration number to have a unique kind of constraint. You can add the constraint. Or alternatively, you could be having a constraint that originally had, it was just name voucher, and then voucher, you're saying, okay, it's just going to capture the name of the student, but I want this particular column to be unique. Then you can go and add the constraint unique. So the same thing applies with if you want to remove a column. So if you want to remove a column called reg number, you can drop the column, or you can also drop the constraint. You can drop the constraint unique. You can drop the constraint primary key. You can drop the constraint. So those are the 3 types of adjustments that you can work, that you can put on your table. Am I clear up to that point? I don't want to move. I want to move as slow as I can, because usually students tend to mix these statements. They mix the DDL statements with the DML statements. So if I am clear up to this point, then I can proceed. Okay? All right. So these are examples of alter table students, add weight number, alter table students, add height number, then alter table students, and then you modify the weight number. These things you can just try out. So in essence, you go and create a table called student, give it any sorts of attributes that you want, and then after you can start to add, you can see if you can modify those tables, and you can see if you can modify those tables, and then also modifying the constraints. And one thing that I need to tell you, with SQL, with databases, if you do not practice, I am telling you, you cannot cram it. It only becomes enjoyable and understandable if you are working with this syntax. Play around with the syntax. Your databases are not going to crash. Your computers are not going to crash. Play with these syntaxes as much as you can. And the more you work with these syntaxes, the more they stick to you. And you will not have a problem with what does a modify mean? What does a delete, rename, alter? What do those things mean? You will know. But if you're waiting for the exam and the test, and then you get your handout and start cramming this in, trust me, you're going to fail it. And remember, the way we facilitate may not be the way we examine. That is why we can only try as much as possible to give these different things. But when it comes to examining you, we go beyond what we have taught you. So please try and practice with your server as much as you can. So to add a column in a table, you use an alter statement, okay? If you want to add a column to a table. Now, this alter statement is only applying to a table that you already created, okay? Not when you are just creating a new table. No. If you're creating a new table, you have already specified. Remember the other syntax that we saw? Create table student, and then you specify the attributes that you're going to have in that table. Then you specify the constraints and then the data types. But after you have created the database and it is already after creating the table and it is already in the database, now you want to add a particular column to that particular table. Now you use an alter statement. You need to specify, you say alter table. Now the DBMS knows that you're going to alter, you're going to make changes to the table, but you have got to specify the table name. So in this case, you say alter table, and the table name in this case is, let's say, registration number. And then you say add column name, okay? So we are going to add the column name. In this case, let's say, let's say you're adding a new column called date of birth. So you add the column name, date of birth, and then you add the data type. So this is the example here. Alter table student. Now the system the system knows that you are going now to alter the table called student. Then when you say add, now in this case you are adding the email. The email is the what? Is the column that you're adding, and voucher is the data type, and then you also specify the domain. If you're going to delete a column, you drop it. The statement is the drop, but you say alter table because we are making a change to the structure of the database. So you specify the table. In this case, the table is student. What do you want to remove from that table? I want to drop a column. I want to drop an attribute called email. Another thing, don't forget to terminate the statements. Whenever you finish to write a syntax, you have to terminate that syntax. If you don't terminate it, it will not run. So always remember to terminate statement by putting a semicolon at the end of your statement. Then changing the data type, again, you alter table, okay? Then you modify the column, and then you put the column name and the data type. So it is the same. One, I always tell students that where understanding fails, you cram. But this thing, it is a combination of both. You have to cram and you also have to understand. The other thing of cramming, you can do it if you're going to, let's say if you have a paragraph you want to cram, and maybe it's in what, I don't know what the kind of, okay, for example, in this same very course, if I'm going to ask you what is a database, what is what other things have, what is a database, what is a data definition language, those ones you can cram because the definition is that, but this you cannot cram. You have got to understand and you've got to continue practicing. Adding constraints after a table is already created. The add constraint command is used to create a constraint after the table has been created. So here you're trying to add a constraint. For example, this is the general syntax is alter table, table name, add constraint, okay? Then you specify the constraint that you're adding to the table. Okay, so everything is possible. You can add a constraint when you're creating the database at the beginning, or you can add a constraint after you have created the database. But I usually advise students to do everything at the beginning of the table, at the beginning when you're creating the structure of the database, because sometimes the altering becomes a little bit hard. But when you have mastered these syntaxes and the statements, it becomes even enjoyable when you're trying out something and then it refuses, and then you go read about it until it's actually until the point when the syntax runs. So you can try out all these different things. I don't know how many times I will say this, but please try out these things, please. I don't want you to get a shock of your life. Okay. So we're still on DDL. The not null constraint is added by modifying the column that is not to be defined as not null. Okay. So in other words, not null, like I said, for example, when we are looking at the entity integrity, it is only put to those particular columns that you want not to have duplicated values. So if you want to have a not null on a particular column, you can modify it, okay? But remember, modify statement goes hand in hand with the alter statement, okay? So whenever you're going to do anything, if you're going to change the structure of your database, it has to be an alter statement. It is confusing, but it becomes understandable if you are working with these things over and over. So if you're going to remove a table from the database, you use a drop statement. So the general syntax is drop the table and then the table name. So drop table students. It will drop the table inevitably. And if you want to check whether that table has been dropped, you go to the show statement. You go show, and then you specify the table. You will be in position to see whether that table is still part of your database. Let me ask someone here. Edith, you have said some. Adrian, I know you have, but Adrian, are you there? Adrian, are you there? Adrian, you people, maybe you put on your Zoom and then you walk away. Okay, let me look out for someone else. Brian Mugisa, are you there? Brian Mugisa, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Brian.
I'm there.
All right. Brian, if you look at this
Yes.
If you look at this syntax, I know it is too early for me to ask this, but maybe I could be having some students and looking at the views of the views on my YouTube channel. I realized that many of you at least were in position to watch the videos. So I will ask, if you look at that syntax, do you think it will execute?
Well, I think it may not execute.
Why? Why?
Mainly, okay, when it comes to some variables, their initialization, some of them don't have data types, and yeah.
For example,
I think
like
mainly because of that.
okay, like give me an example of the not very call them columns or attributes. Give me an example of those columns that don't have data types.
One of them is we have last name, first name, then
Okay.
ID. They all don't have data types.
Okay. So because this is a create statement, we said that in the create statement, there are certain things that are mandatory. So you have to, one, the table name is mandatory, and then the column name is also mandatory. Okay, and the data type is mandatory. So if you look at that statement, the columns don't have data types. So that is why that statement will not execute. What about the down? Okay, the downer one. Let me pick someone else. I have someone here who is always Carol. Carol? Carol, are you there?
Yes, madam.
Okay. The second statement. What is the error in that statement?
Yes, madam.
What do you see any error in that statement? Alter tables.
Yes.
Do you see any error in that statement? Will it execute?
Madam.
Yes. You cannot hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Let me pick on someone else.
Can I try?
Please, who is this? This
is Moses.
Yes, Moses.
Yes. I think it will not execute because you said alter goes hand in hand with modify. So if you're to alter tables, alter table students, you have to modify the with the not null. You add the you cannot add, you modify. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Patricia, you went off. What was your observation? Patricia? Patricia? Patricia, your hand was up.
Good morning, madam.
Morning, how are you?
That's same observation I was going to give.
All right. Okay, thank you very much. So many of us are on board. Okay. So I had instructed you, I hope that you have created these 3 tables. Okay. Did you create these 3 tables? Because I am going to tell you to share your screens, I have already told you to create those tables. Asimwa Christian. Christine Asimwe. Christine Asimwe. Christine Asimwe. You guys, do you just log on and then go?
Yes, madam.
Yes. Did you create these tables in your server?
We created.
Yes, madam.
You did create?
Yes.
All right, that is good. Okay. So I hope
Yes, madam.
it's okay. You can mute yourself. So this is this is the table that I'm expecting each and every one of you to have in your database, because it is the one that we are going to keep manipulating. So everyone should have this. And I am going to be asking people to share their screens, and then I'll just be picking on one person, and then they take us through a given statement based on what I will have at that particular moment in time. Okay, so let's go to adding foreign keys on an existing table. Adding a foreign key on an existing table. So you alter table student, you add a foreign key. For example, this is foreign key prog code, references the program. Remember, okay, remember that a foreign key is an attribute in another table that is acting as a primary key in a mother relation. That is a foreign key. And a foreign key enforces the referential integrity rule. I hope you still remember the referential integrity rule. Let me pick on someone to tell us the referential integrity rule. Gabula John Stephen. Gabula. Can you please just remind us of what the referential integrity rule is?
I don't actually recall it very well.
Okay, you just tell us what you recall.
I have no idea right now about it.
Esther Chisache, you're active in my class, so please tell me. Esther. Esther? Esther, are you there? Edith? Akulo?
Yes.
Referential integrity rule. Just,
Right.
sorry?
Yes, I'm going to explain as best as I can.
Yeah, but your voice is so low. Can you try to increase on your voice? Edith, most times you're audible. What's happening today? Are you still in bed?
No, I was using my earphones. Let me take them off.
Okay.
All right, so first of all, the foreign key is when you take a primary key from another table and you put it into another table as a foreign key so that you reference that particular table. Now for referential integrity, it means that, for example, if in that first table where you had picked that primary key, you had, for example, a branch number and you had branch 1 and branch 2. When you go into the next table where you have transferred it to, you shouldn't be expecting values that don't match the ones that are in the original primary key. So for example, you can't have branch 3 yet it is not referenced in the other first table where you picked it from.
So in essence, we say the referential integrity rule is the values of the foreign key must match the values of the primary key, or the values of the foreign key must be left wholly null. That is what Edith has explained in summary. So if you're going to add a foreign key to a table that already exists, this is what you're going to, this is the syntax. If you're adding a foreign key to a new table that you are creating, this is how you create a foreign key. This is the general syntax, okay? Okay, it's not the general syntax because we have put registration number, first name, last name, but at least you need to know that you have to create the table, tell us the table name, specify all the attributes within the table, specify all the data types within the table. If there are any constraints that you want to put to the different attributes, you also specify them. Most importantly, don't forget to specify the primary key of that particular table. Then at the end of the table, you remember when we said that constraints can be put on the column level or at the table level, but at the end of the table now, That is where we are putting the foreign key constraint at the end of the table. We're not putting it on at the column level. So that is also something that you need to take home. All right, so that is what I had for this particular session. We're going to have a break of like 5 minutes, and then we go to we're going to have a break. We're going to have just a break. So actually, I have gone through this thing. The next thing is the creating of the database, okay? So the other, that is using MySQL. That one I am not going to facilitate because we already have this. What I'll only ask, if there is anyone who got a challenge in creating these things in the database management system, that is in your web server. But I am not going to go through the steps, create, table, student. No, those ones I'm not going to do because the video is very explicit. So unless there is someone who got a challenge in creating this table called student with these attributes, with these so on and so forth, that is the person that I want to actually help. Otherwise, this is going to be the end of my lecture today. Is there anyone who created these things and they got issues at the time of creating the table? Anyone who had issues? I'm asking those ones who created the tables. These ones that have not created the tables, please don't ask me because you have not tried. I just want those people that have tried. Otherwise, I am not going to go through the other steps, create table, that one I'm not going to do that. So,
Madam.
Yes?
Like after creating the table, I was trying to drop like 2 entries at once, but it was, I didn't know the syntax for dropping 2 entries at once.
For drop, what entries did you want to drop?
If you want to drop like the first name and the program code, yeah? Yeah, like the syntax for dropping them. It only accepts when you drop one by one.
Now let me ask. Okay, go ahead.
Isn't it possible to drop the 2 at once?
Yes, you can even drop 3 and 100. But now let me ask Gabula. Gabula, you have gone off. Gabula,
No, I'm on.
Yes.
I'm on.
I need to ask you.
Yes.
Did you bother to go and look at how they drop more than 2 attributes in a table at once?
I tried searching it, but I didn't find it actually.
Gabula, where did you go to W3 schools?
Not yet.
W3 schools has everything. You people, I don't want to spoon feed you. I think I do a lot of spoon feeding and most of us fail to even go an extra. W3 schools has everything concerning database, not databases, not only SQL, even Oracle, even web development, everything is in W3 schools. Gabula.
Yes, madam. Yes, madam.
On Tuesday, we have a class.
Okay.
When you come on Tuesday, I want you to drop 2 columns in the table. I have given that as an assignment. So on Tuesday, when we start a class, we are going to start with that. Kindly go and research about it. That's the only way you learn.
All right, madam.
All right?
Yes, it's fine.
All right. Okay.
Then the next issue, why is it that after modifying a constraint as not null, the default, after modifying a constraint as not null, the default remains null? Why is it like that? Like all the defaults are null on the default side?
Yeah, because you have the constraint, you have changed it to not null, or you have changed it to null.
Like when I've changed the constraint to not null, On the column of null, it says no, but on the column of default, it remains null.
Am I getting you? Am I getting you? You have specified the column, you have altered the table.
Yes.
And then you have specified the column as not null.
Yes.
But then you have other columns that were default.
Yes, yes.
And then now those columns are showing as null.
Yes.
Yes, it is okay. Because now it implies that those particular columns can be null values. Okay, so you will see that when we go in the joins, it will show if the column is not a null, it will show not null, and the other ones will show null, not null, and then null, which is fine.
Okay.
Yes.
Fine, madam.
Thank you. And John, Gabla John, thank you for trying out. Now, this is the spirit. You know, you give I give people work to do, they actually go and try out. Now, when we come here, we are discussing things on an informed point of view, but you guys, others are just sleeping. Others, you can even afford to say, I don't have a laptop. You are a software engineering student and you say you don't have a laptop? Really? I think you're doing a wrong course. If a software engineering student can tell me, you see, madam, I don't have a laptop. You know, a computer to a person who is doing computing is a necessity, sorry. Okay? So any other person who had issues? So if we don't have any issues, I am going to close the session, okay? We meet on Tuesday, same time, okay? Hello?
Yeah, for me on Tuesday.
Tuesday, same time. Have yourself a good day, and thanks for turning up on short notice. Enjoy your enjoy. Do you have any questions? All right. Enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.
Likewise.
Madam.